Hello once again from the Prim Reaper. This is essentially part 2 from the previous discussion I started in my last video, though it is covering a topic of a different breadth and scope from the first one. These videos are going to be all about the different methods of communication that I see in the men's rights community, how these different methods are likely to attract or be differentially effective with different types of individuals, how other methods might attract attention but may be less effective in winning converts, and my experiences with using different methods of communication in different social circles to make persuasive arguments. When I said these videos aren't meant to tone police in the last one, I probably could have just saved that warning for this video. I want to be clear that I'm not trying to tell anyone how to do their activism. My answer to my own catchy clickbaity title down there is no. I really don't think there's any one right way to address these issues. Far be it from me, a woman, to even attempt to suggest such a thing. Different people are going to be attracted to different methods of communication and presentation. That's the beauty of it. The important thing isn't going to be doing activism perfectly. It's just that people are talking about the issues and bringing attention to them in one way or another. Does this mean that we can't be more or less effective in different areas, though? No. And that's the point. I think the clearest way to explain what I mean is to break this discussion into what I see as the 3 main styles of communicating that I see in the MRM. And as I finished getting through this script, I realized I was going to need to break this into 2 videos, as there's just really no way to get through all these styles in a concise enough but complete enough manner to fit into one. But I promise I'll try not to take an entire month between the segments. For a good starting example of the provocative style of communication, let's talk a bit about Paul Elam's style of writing articles. I'm a big fan of Paul Elam and his no-nonsense way of addressing the issues that men face, and in challenging the rhetoric that people, let's be honest, most often those of the radical feminist persuasion, like to use against men, flipping it around and throwing it back at them. I think Paul Elam is a brilliant individual, and I hope to one day be able to help men even a fraction of the amount that he's been able to do. But strictly speaking, his more provocative articles are likely to draw a certain type of attention, and a lot of that is not going to be the good ears open, ready to listen kind of attention. Even Cassie J, who was initially inspired to start working on her documentary The Red Pill after seeing Paul Elam's more attention-grabbing articles, well, you might recall that she initially started the project with the intention to expose the dark underbelly of the men's rights movement, to show people the kinds of things these misogynists posted. Though Paul Elam's article got her attention, it wasn't the thing that ultimately changed her mind and made her see the value in discussing men's issues. That didn't happen until she sat down and started talking with them. And as those of you who have watched the movie know, the way Paul Elam was speaking to her in person was considerably different from the kind of language he was using in his article. Now, does this mean that the way Paul Elam wrote his initial article was bad? No, not at all. But its purpose was not really to attempt to persuade anyone to listen to the passionate pleas of men's advocates or to win converts to the cause. And let's be real here, an intelligent fellow like Paul Elam knew that when he wrote it. The problem is the people who see articles like that and then use that as a license to gang up in a cohesive group to scream, "This is what men's rights looks like!" Or the kinds of people who will go on to articles like this saying, "This is why people don't respect us," entirely missing the point that the article wasn't about garnering respect to begin with. The provocative style of communicating is often used in one of 2 ways. As a mirror, to reflect and highlight negative themes arising in the mainstream, very much like the example I'd just been talking about over the last little while. After all, Paul wasn't literally suggesting we go out and bash women. He was just pointing out the hypocrisy in people being able to write articles like this, and nobody batting an eye. The other way this communication style is used, and this is in no way mutually exclusive from the first reason, is to draw attention. Outrageous titles and very strong language is, after all, a great way of drawing clicks to your articles and videos. Drawing attention for the sake of drawing attention is not always a bad thing, but again, it's not always going to be the best way to persuade people if you don't also have a very compelling argument. Problem is, depending on the level of provocation, people might not be willing to listen at that point. There is another style of communication that may often look similar to this first style in certain ways, but is actually quite functionally different and has very different intentions. This is the kind of style in which people are often discussing the issues in a very heightened and forceful manner, often because people are discussing topics that hit close to home or really strike a chord with them in some way. Now, generally speaking, the emotions most often to come up in this kind of communication are either sadness or anger, and both of these are going to be born out of different experiences and will tend to elicit different responses in other people. Sadness is an emotion I tend to see most often in men who are discussing a serious personal loss. In my experience, this is most common when talking about a custody battle for their children, especially when they haven't been able to see them for a long time. But I also see it a lot in men who have been simply unable to find social supports to help them, and who are feeling lonely and downtrodden. Now, the thing about this style of communication is that it often comes from a very genuine and tragic place. A lot of men are hesitant to express their vulnerabilities in such a public manner, which may be partially due to biological factors. Legitimately, down to the molecular level, men experience depression in an extremely different way from women. And I'll include a study down below in the low bar that actually examines this subject that I found very interesting. And partially due to social factors. That is, people often respond very differently to men's depression as compared to women's depression. So, depending on the individual, you may get people who will be more likely to acknowledge the severity of a problem if they see a man expressing their feelings so strongly, or you might get the unfortunate experience of dealing with people who will minimize the problem by virtue of it coming from a man or comparing his experiences to those of women. And rarely you'll deal with the absolute psychopaths who will insult or make fun of men for expressing these emotions.
Toddle off to the men's rights movement subreddits and bitch and moan with the other guys who are upset at the unfair divorce settlement, or because they never get to see their kids, or because the girl they like won't go out with them. There's a place for you. It's called the men's rights movement.
So much for challenging the notions of so-called toxic masculinity, eh? But anyway, for those individuals without a heart of stone, hearing these sad stories from men who have been deeply hurt by the systems in place can have two main effects. One, it humanizes these men, which is important because it counteracts a lot of the disparagement that men get from a number of sources in society these days. And two, it can help them to realize some of the disadvantages that these men have that they might not have previously been aware of. As much as it is a shame to admit this effect often becomes even stronger if a woman is expressing her own sad experiences of a male partner or family member suffering through one of the issues that MRAs talk about. For example, someone who says that a man who is falsely accused of sexual assault can learn from the experience might not be so eager to dismiss his case if she knew how profoundly his imprisonment impacted his devoted wife and daughter. And trust me, I must stress that it brings me great displeasure to have to use an example like this to get some individuals to care about male suffering. I know that to many of us, this caring and empathy should simply be obvious and come naturally, but unfortunately for many people, this just isn't the case. Fortunately, this style of communication can actually help people to develop more empathy for men in this way. I've seen it myself, both in comments in my YouTube videos and in interactions with people in real life as well. When I talk to people about how much it breaks my heart to see what so many of these men are going through, including men that I know personally and have seen their anguish myself, I get almost unanimous support and agreement. Now, the brother to this side of the emotional, passionate style of communicating is, of course, the angry approach. The angry emotional style is the type that can more closely resemble the provocative style in many ways. It often comes with a lot of strong language. It can come with a significant helping of finger-pointing and blaming other groups for wrongs done upon the speaker or those the speaker cares about. It can often be quite dismissive and even insulting on the extreme ends. This is often directed towards a large group of people or an ideology, such as feminism, but it can also be directed towards an individual. For example, at an ex-wife who took her husband to the cleaners, which can make this style of communication look petty or childish. Regardless, it comes from a very different place than someone who is simply trying to provoke. This is where the passionate end comes into play. Whereas provocation is usually more deliberate and sarcastic in nature, someone communicating in this way may be doing so for a variety of more complex reasons. They are fighting a painful personal battle and have been mocked, faced very little if any support, and/or have exhausted all their personal resources in fighting it. Someone they care about is facing a similar battle and they don't understand how this could have happened. They are challenging something they view as an extreme societal injustice and they're frustrated that other people don't see it the same way. They're tired of facing societal apathy towards something they feel very strongly about and are trying to fire people up. So, in contrast to the provocative style, the angry emotional style comes from a place that is much more raw and not always as controlled. Because of the level of enthusiasm often present in this method of communicating, it can indeed work to rile people up and rally others to the cause. However, in the wrong audiences, it also runs the risk of drawing accusations of being an angry insert whatever descriptions suit you male who is simply displaying their toxic masculinity, or more generally, and more gender inclusive, an angry MRA. It's a shame, actually. I've fielded conversations with people who say, I get that men have some legitimate issues in our society, but the way that some of those angry MRAs go about it is really... And it's kind of sad if you think about it. How often do we talk as a society about the damaging effects that mental health stigma has on individuals? Is anger not a legitimate emotion for many people to feel when they've been wronged? It seems hypocritical to only be accepting of people who want to talk about their problems in the emotionally correct or acceptable ways. Frankly, I think if someone feels angry about the wrongs they've experienced, they should be given a place to express these feelings with support and without judgment. But alas, a lot of people are made uncomfortable by angry emotions, like it or not, so this can make navigating discussions with others in this state a bit of a risky affair. Now, the last thing that I would ever do is to tell anyone how to feel their feelings, but in getting other people to listen to your concerns, there is a bit of an art to communication. The best strategy in this case is either going to be to try to moderate your language, not even in the sense of avoiding swearing, though keeping it to a minimum might help, but simply in trying to speak in such a way that you come across as more educated or authoritative, or in making sure to thoroughly cite your sources when making complaints. This way, when people try to dismiss you simply because of your anger, you can point a finger and respond, "Sure, I might be angry, but I have a good goddamned reason for feeling that way." Finally, I feel like this goes without saying, but obviously it is never going to be a good strategy to let your anger lead you into behaviors like making generalizations, threats, or just generally behaving in an overly aggressive manner towards other groups. This is one of the most effective ways to turn people off from your cause and make them dismissive of you. Anger can be used to good measure, but if it is too uncontrolled and aggressive, it will often have the opposite effect from what you're trying to achieve. Think of people like Big Red, for example. Is that a person you have any desire to listen to at all? Of course not. You don't want to be a Big Red. Trust me on this. So I'm going to save the last communication style for another video, because when I started to write about it, I realized I would have way too much to say about it, and this would inevitably turn into another half-hour plus long video, which I know a lot of people aren't fans of. So I figured I would just leave it at this, and try to get the next one out ASAP at the beginning of January so that there's not a huge disconnect between them. Plus, it behooves me to get a video out for January as soon as possible, given that the Wii one is due at the end of the month. That being said, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.